Ever since she was cursed by a fairy, Theodora Eddings has had no sense of fear or embarrassment, an unfortunate condition that leaves her prone to accidental scandal. Dora hopes to be a quiet, sensible wallflower during the London season, but when Elias Wilder, the handsome, peculiar, and utterly ill-mannered Lord Sorcier, discovers her condition, she's instead drawn into dangerous fairy affairs. I wrote the story I said I wanted to do another book review today. Another book I'm reading for the folklore class I'm taking is called Half a Soul, and it's by Olivia Atwater. Apparently, I think this is the first book in a series of like folklore or folk fairy tales that are kind of just taken and turned into something different, which is really, 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 really interesting. So the leading lady in this book, this is kind of like a romance story, but it's very much very, very heavy. It's also heavy in the idea that what is socially acceptable is not necessarily right. So if you're into that kind of thing, that is part of this book. I'm not really a political person, but I can respect it when I'm reading stories. So there is that. This book is about a woman named Dora. Her real name is Theodora, but she goes by Dora. She has half a soul because a fairy has cursed her. And as she's going through the story, she is learning, well, her family and everybody knows that there's something wrong with her because a fairy has stolen half of her soul, has cursed her. And she has one eye that is a different color than the other eye, which already, and you're talking about, this is a little bit more historical, so it's like back in the time when balls were a big thing and you had to be socially acceptable, chaperones, all that kind of thing. So it's kind of like historical fiction with fae. But anyways, so she is not socially acceptable in any way, shape, or form. She does not say things properly because half of her soul, part of her soul was her feelings, and she struggles having feelings, caring about things. Like she can care about things, but not in the way that other people do. And she doesn't understand necessarily when she has done something that isn't socially acceptable. Like sometimes you'll hear her say, oh dear, I've done it again. I've said something that was not appropriate or something like that, right? Which pulls into this idea of socially acceptable behavior. But the whole story based off this girl who just, she has only half a soul, and she has to figure out how to be who she is because of that, and if she wants her whole soul back and how to do that, and it's a whole thing. But it's a really fun experience. It's a really well written story. It has a lot of engagement. Like there's a lot of really funny parts. I found myself talking to this book a lot. I'm like, you did not, my husband's like, what are you reading? But I like it when a book does that. I enjoy it when a book does that because I feel like I'm engaged with the story in a way that I wouldn't normally be engaged in a story. If I can keep my mouth shut, then, it's one thing. If I have to talk to the book because it's causing a reaction in me, I like it. And it doesn't really matter what kind of reaction it is. I mean, it could be anger sometimes, or it could be love, the love feelings or sadness or crying. There's no crying in this book, okay? There's no crying. It's pretty lighthearted for the most part with some really heavy underlying themes, okay? Anyways, so Dora's going about her process, and her cousin Vanessa is in the way of just being introduced to society and taking on suitors. Well, Vanessa wants Dora to have a suitor, but nobody's going to accept Dora because Dora is not socially acceptable. Well, then they go to London, and they go to these balls, and they come across a sorcerer who's also not socially acceptable. And Vanessa has talked this sorcerer into trying to help her sister with this fairy curse, which takes them on this whole other adventure, which is really fun to experience. But he is definitely not socially acceptable. And because he is a rude person, he likes being rude because it puts people off. And it means that he doesn't have to engage with them. So he doesn't want to engage with them. So he does things that will often cause women to have the vapors or be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you said that. And Dora's not like that because she does not understand the difference. To her, if he says something like that, she's just going to go back at him, which is funny because she's the only person who does. And of course, that's the best kind of love, isn't it? Where you could just be yourself regardless. So it was a really, really amazing story to read, honestly, and it brought up a lot of things within me that I was not expecting. Like, for example, socially acceptable behavior, right? Other people are thinking along the lines in this book, along the lines of, dinners and balls and all this stuff, which really irritates the sorcerer in this book because he knows that the world isn't like that. The world is mean and it's hard and it's cruel and all these bad things are happening to people and nobody seems to care, and it really frustrates him. Like, a lot frustrates him. He has a really kind heart, and you find that out throughout the story. And within finding that out, it's kind of interesting to see him blossom in his own way, even though the story is not specifically about him, but has, it's mainly focused, it's all in Dora's point of view, pretty much. But some of the stuff that came up about being socially acceptable really made me think about other things, especially during this folklore class that I'm taking. Like, things that I think about is am I socially acceptable? What about me wouldn't be socially acceptable? How do I see that about myself, right? And there were questions that came up in the folklore class that I do not agree with a lot of other people on. So it provided a unique learning experience, is the best way to put that. I'm a fairy person, okay? It is not socially acceptable to believe in fairies. It's not. People think I'm crazy, right? They think that I'm just on a whim or something like that. It's also not socially acceptable, believe it or not, to live off grid. People talk about it, but when you actually do it, the way your friends and family react are different. Okay, my family did not react well to me moving off grid. Because I also don't use conventional means off grid, right? We don't have a microwave. And holy cow, that's the end of the world to some people, okay? We also don't have a conventional toilet. We have a compost toilet. And when people come out here, they are not okay with it. Okay, they are not okay with it. My lifestyle is not a socially acceptable lifestyle. It's not frowned upon necessarily, but it is at the same time, which is a really weird place to be, which is kind of what this book is about, is like this idea that people know something's wrong with Dora. They know something's wrong with the sorcerer, but because of who they are, because of who they are engaged with, not everybody calls them out on things, but sometimes they need to be called out on it too. Like, there's some moments in here, especially with the sorcerer, that was like, his name's Elias, and sometimes he says things and I'm like, oh man, I would have slapped you. Do I think I really would have slapped him? Probably not, because I'm not that kind of person. But still, the thought was in my head, and I was like, I cannot believe that. But that's the whole thing, right? Is what part of the social acceptability should be there and what shouldn't be there, and what should and shouldn't you do with your life because of it, right? That's a whole thing. Like, that's a whole thing. It would have been socially acceptable for Dora to hide back in the countryside and not go to London and not take part in the balls. And people encouraged that about her because she was not socially acceptable. She didn't say the right thing. She didn't look the part. And people were offended by that. There's people who take offense to this idea. And I mean, when we talk about these kinds of issues, it does bring up our shadow, doesn't it? It does bring up our past and our history and the way that we look at our world and stuff like that, but only if somebody is posing it to us, right? I really wouldn't have thought about it that way if I wasn't taking the folklore class. I would have just read this really enjoyable story and went about my day. But because I'm taking this folklore class and they posed this socially acceptable question, I was like, wait, what? And suddenly I had all these things now to journal about, which is the fun part about taking like folklore classes or just experiencing things in a different way than you normally would. Especially like books. I like book clubs. I like talking to people about books. So this folklore class has really helped me explore some more of that rather than just being on my own reading. Because when you're just on your own reading, sometimes you may not think about things the same way as if somebody brought it up to you, right? Which is the great part about social things. Because without other people engaging with you, you may not have thought of those things. And that's a really interesting thing too that's going on in the book, because Dora is somebody who is not socially acceptable and people often kind of just put her by the wayside. It surprises people when she has a good idea and they actually accept that as a good idea, because they're like, oh, if you weren't here, I wouldn't have thought about that, which is also really interesting. So it is a love story. It does have a happy ending. It's not spicy in any way, shape, or form, but it's a great read. It's a great little fairy read. It does turn more towards the darker side of fae. So be prepared for that part. There is some very dark parts of that in here, but nothing that should be like triggering necessarily, I don't think. So yeah, it's a really interesting take on how Fae might see our society even, because they don't see things the same that we do. So it was a really interesting read. If you get the opportunity, definitely pick this up at your library or go ahead and get it on your e-reader or audiobook, whatever you want to do. It's short. I read it in one sitting, one day. I read it in one day. What did I have highlighted here? Oh yeah, there's an Alice in Wonderland reference in here that I was so cool. I thought it was so cool. I was talking about the sorcerer guy, and she goes, he does at least 3 impossible things before breakfast, the way I hear it told. Certainly he could tell us which end would be which. And they're actually talking about what happens if a dolphin and a horse were put together. Which end would be the head? So it's a really interesting take on some fairy tale stuff, and I really enjoyed it. So anyways, it was a 4-star read for me. So thank you guys so much for watching and listening to me babble about some books. I do enjoy reading a whole lot, and I want to do more fairy book related content on my channel, so I'm planning on doing that. So again, you guys have a very great day.